Hello, this is Patrick, and I am here with a new video for the EDCI 57 Literacy Difficulties class, Module 3. We are really focusing in on early reading intervention and phonemic awareness instruction within those settings and classroom settings. I have 5 points to make today. I'm going to run through them quickly. My goal is to be more succinct in these videos. You have plenty of other content to deal with in the modules. So number one is really common knowledge, but it is that early intervention is absolutely critical. It's the best time to try to really accelerate kids' reading development. Why? Well, it's what we've been talking about really since Module 1, to try and catch them and accelerate their growth back to a normal band of performance before that Matthew effect widens and the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. What we're really trying to do in the earliest intervention is just that, prevent the gap from widening. And the gap we're largely talking about is the reading practice gap. Once kids are able to decode independently, they begin to accumulate reading practice. And that reading practice allows them to automatize more and more words, develop a sight word lexicon in their head that is the biggest contributor to reading fluency. So for kids who struggle to learn to decode, they don't read much independently. They don't read as much in actual reading instruction because they read so slowly. And you get this ever-widening practice gap in terms of reading and the way they benefit even from reading instruction. So early intervention, really kind of preventative intervention, has proven far more effective than remedial intervention, that we might pick up in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. Not that we don't need to be doing those things, but by that time, we're trying to overcome not only the original issues that caused that below average growth in reading, but then we're also trying to overcome the consequences of this large gap that has been created in reading practice via their more competent peers. So, early intervention deserves priority of place in my mind, as much and as many resources as we can put towards it. Again, not that we don't have to then do our very best as kids move up the grades to continue to try and remediate their difficulties. But boy, strategically, there's no question about it. It pays to put resources in the primary grades, down there, kindergarten, 1st grade, and try and prevent that gap from growing. All right, so the second point is right in line with the first point. The research shows us that earlier is better when it comes to early reading intervention. So intervening with supplemental intervention instruction in kindergarten is better than starting that in 1st grade. We see that in several studies. Rolando O'Connor study demonstrates that. A nice controlled experiment that had a group that was beginning in kindergarten, had a group that was beginning in 1st grade, and the group that began in kindergarten actually, by the time they were up in 2nd, 3rd grade, I think it was 3rd grade, there was a higher percentage of those intervention kids were in that normal band. So it's super important. In the O'Connor study, the kindergarten teachers provided their own tier 2 intervention because we're talking about relatively brief kinds of instruction focused on developing basic phonemic segmenting and blending abilities, developing alphabetic knowledge, so the basic phonics, letter sounds, and so forth. Um, a small group intervention that kindergarten teachers taught, and basically they were successful with 97% of their kindergartners. This was in urban schools, diverse student population, and 97% of their kids were hit benchmarks for phoneme segmentation and for letter sound knowledge. So not that that always has to be the recipe, but I do believe that, again, because kindergarten intervention can be, really deals with these sort of briefer kinds of instruction, you can't sit there and just hammer away at alphabetic knowledge for, 45 minutes straight. Kind of briefer small group, intensely focused, that just accumulates greater repetition and practice for those kids who need it. All right. Point 3 is that, I think I discussed it in the module in the threaded discussion. The Michael Coyne study that showed that that focus on foundational skills, and for the more for a greater length of time, produced greater outcomes than, say, that group that spent half their time on foundational skills and half their time in reading aloud and discussing the reading and maybe introducing some vocabulary words. The point is not that those latter things are unimportant, but if you are in an intervention setting and you're trying to make accelerated gains in critical foundational skills, related to word reading, and that is what those early interventions should focus on. All right, point 4, I want to talk a little bit about phonemic awareness instruction down there with our youngest learners, because there's a lot of interesting discussion going on, even in the public, about phonemic awareness instruction. I feel quite confident in saying that the critical kind of skills when it comes to phonemic awareness for young children are the skills of segmenting and blending the individual phonemes in words. So the ability, when I say, okay, I want you to break apart these sounds in the word dog, that child can go d, ah, g, and segment those individual phonemes. That, of course, plays a critical role in encoding and spelling. You have to, that's exactly what early phonetic spelling is: hearing those individual phonemes and then representing them with the appropriate letter. On the other side, I can say to that, on the blending side, I say to that kid, okay, I want you to listen to these sounds. I'm saying them in my kind of funny robot voice. I want you to blend them together and tell me what word I'm saying. So I say d, ah, g, and they blend those together and say, oh, it's dog, Mr. Maniac. Go, yes, absolutely. That, of course, plays a critical role in, it's exactly the step in decoding words when the child is, making those individual letter sounds, and then the phonemic task of blending them together. So dog. Okay, so not only do those at that skill level play that role, but then, as you'll see in the Kilpatrick video about orthographic mapping, this kind of phonemic processing ability plays a deeper role in terms of really cementing words in long-term memory. I like to say that the phonemes, and I think Kilpatrick says this too, the phonemes are put up shelves for us to store sort of the spellings of words, and it is that sort of long-term storage in the closet and the shelves of our brain that allow us then to begin to read those words automatically by sight. Now, I stress here that the critical skill, and this is definitely was the position of the National Reading Panel 20 plus years ago, and a lot of research since then, is this ability to segment and blend the individual sounds and words. There is a lot of instruction going on these days at the phonological level. So dealing with larger sound chunks in words. So that could be the individual words and compound words, background. Now say it without the ground, back. Okay. So that's not ever getting down to the phoneme level or syllable level. Let's, clap the syllables, umbrella, or count the syllables, umbrella. Or can you say, delete a syllable? The rhyme would be another one that is above the phoneme level at the phonological level. The problem with that is that those do not, that interventions and instruction in those areas do not predict early reading achievement. Early reading and spelling are phonemic tasks, not broader phonological tasks. Now, why would people teach, syllable segmenting and blending and rhyme? Well, naturally, we do develop this phonological ability with larger chunks of sound and heading towards smaller chunks of sound. It's easier to do with larger chunks of sound versus those individual phonemes in words that co-articulate, they stick together, and it's hard to pull them apart. It's not natural like it is syllables. However, a natural sequence of development doesn't suggest an instructional sequence of development. We've seen in one of the earliest, most successful phonemic awareness interventions, the Say It in Movement activity from the Road to the Code by Ball and Blockman back in the early 90s. They start with kindergartners with lesson 1, saying and moving, as you'll see in my dyslexia video, saying and moving with the individual phonemes and words. That is both so you have both a segmenting and a blending dimension to that. So it concerns me. I think it ought to concern you. If you have, say, kindergarten teachers down there, in theory, teaching phonemic awareness or PA instruction, that is aimed at the phonological level, that is aimed at things like compound words and syllables and rhyme. I would strongly recommend, and it is the recommendation of the National Reading Panel, to begin with phoneme segmenting and blending from day 1 of kindergarten. That doesn't mean that the phonological skills, should be ignored, but the priority of place in this instruction should always be at that individual phoneme level. We've got, kind of popular phonemic awareness programs like Haggerty that really spend a lot of time focused on phonological skills. And I think that we can do better. We can do better by really zeroing in on phonemic awareness. I would not be a kindergarten teacher or a kindergarten interventionist if they did not let me use the Ball and Blockman Say It and Move It activity every day with kids. That's not the only way to get at that. You'll see in my phonemes and use piece several activities that kind of all do the same things, but Say It and Move It just should be the backbone of, I think, any kindergarten instruction in this phonological or phonemic awareness area. All right. So point number 5, this has to do with basic alphabetic knowledge. So teaching the basic letter sounds. And this is really aimed as much towards tier 1 as it is intervention. There's been several studies recently that address the pace of letter sound instruction. And they both conclude, based on the evidence, that a faster introduction of basic letter sounds in kindergarten is superior to a slower pace of introduction. So there's been a lot of tradition. I don't know, I still talk to teachers who do it this way today, of introducing a letter a week in kindergarten. Well, I mean, if you take the 25 or 26, let's say we remove the X and the Q from that right off in terms of the first wave of introduction, you have 24 basic letter sounds. And of course, if you go one a week, you're talking about 24 weeks of the year, past the midway point before you would sort of start to reteach those. That does a couple of things. One, for the kids who enter kindergarten already knowing those sounds, that is a lot of wasted time when they can move towards really putting their letter sound knowledge and their phonemic awareness ability to work, reading and writing words and texts. And, what we find is even with the kids who enter without a lot of letter sound knowledge, that the faster pace, our former dean, Ray Reutzel, did a study in Utah where they did compare sort of introducing 5 letter sounds a week to 1. If you go 5 a week, let's say again, roughly those 25 letter sounds, you've completed that cycle in 5 weeks and you can start it again. And, it is that sort of repeated cycling that seems to really, make those letter sounds stick, as well as it gives a natural stopping point for those kids who are on the higher end. Wait, we've been through the cycle. Let's say they came with some letter sound knowledge. Now we've been through the cycle. We assess, they know it all. They're moving on. They're doing something different, other than maybe some brief reviews in the whole class setting. But even for the kids who are on the lower end, if we cover, I've tended to suggest, I just did this in a professional development down in Fort Collins, suggesting 4 letter sounds a week with and some review built in throughout those days, and with a 5th day of really significant review. At 4 a week, in 6 weeks, you're going to complete that sequence and you can start it again. In 12 weeks, you've completed it twice. In 18 weeks, before the halfway point in kindergarten, you've repeated it 3 times. And, the research is showing that kind of pacing that allows for these cycles and then retaught cycles and allows some kids to jump off that train and start doing other things because they've learned those letter sounds, is producing far superior results. All right, now, there's obviously much more to say about the earliest of reading interventions, related to beginning decoding and text for beginning reading and so forth. However, our next module is really the word recognition module. So I'm going to save that and just focus today on what I've shared and the phonemic awareness side of things. And in a couple weeks, we'll come back and revisit beginning decoding and activities for that, advanced decoding, the role of text in beginning reading, and so forth. Now, I make sure that we have another video from David Kilpatrick where he shows the orthographic mapping principle of Linnea Aries that underlies effective word reading development. I think that's really important and further explains the role of phonemic awareness in word reading. And then you'll see my short Alexa script. It's called the Alexa script for dyslexia, phonemic awareness. I did this for a project from some special educators who are putting this on iPhones for students and so forth so they can listen to it. So you're actually reading it. So it reads a little different than typical text because it's written to be recorded and played in that fashion. But I want you to read it. It's a very short piece of a couple pages, but most of all, it finishes with a link to another one of my videos that I made where I demonstrate the say it and move it activity. And I want you to see that for sure, because like I said, you couldn't pay me enough to teach kindergarten or to teach early intervention if you forbid me from using say it and move it. It's just that central and that effective, I think, to this early instruction. All right, I'm going to end it right there. Thanks, everyone, and I'll look forward to interacting with you in the threaded discussions.